welcome to Ask a Responsive Fundraiser, where we take your questions to a fundraising expert so that you can grow generosity. Today, we're taking your questions to Kayla Schneider. Kayla's a results-driven data analyst with over a decade of experience in higher education, specializing in advancement, enrollment, and business intelligence. She spent her career transforming complex data into powerful insights, building reporting solutions that fuel decision-making, and optimizing processes to help organizations grow. Kayla, thanks for taking some time to answer some questions today.
Thanks so much for having me, Scott. I'm excited.
Yes. All right. Well, let's dive into our first question. It's this. We spend so much time pulling reports, but they never seem to give us the insights that we actually need. So how can we build reports that are both easy to generate and give us the insights we need to make better decisions?
Woo! Kicking it off. Yeah, this one is so important. I think one thing that is so prevalent right now is like we think we need all the reports and we need all the dashboards, and we then kind of get overwhelmed and we kind of get lost in those reports, right? So we spend all this time pulling reports, but not actually getting what we need out of them. And so I think one of the things that's most important to kind of get started with is that idea of like, what are your organization's strategic goals? What are the main clear metrics that you should be focusing on for your success? And while we might have like 2, 3, or 4 of them, that's great. Let's get started there. Let's get started with just knowing like, these are our North Star metrics. These are the ones that we want to focus on. And that can be different for different organizations, right? Maybe you've never had those North Star metrics. And so starting with easy things like focusing on our donor retention, right? How many people gave last year and then they're continuing to give this year? Yeah. So important, right? That key, doesn't matter how big your organization is, where you're at, like that's never going to change. So we want to make sure we're always retaining our donors. I think another one that's so important is our recurring giving base. It's hard to kind of start a recurring giving program or think about those things, but that's like foundational core, right? Yeah. Like you can count on that money month after month after month. So focusing on something like that, I think is really important. And then also just kind of getting started, what's your average gift size? Like just knowing that, like that basic metric, and then being able to look at your donors against that metric. Are there donors that are hitting that? Are there donors that are above? Maybe I can segment upon that. And so if we take those really 3 metrics and being able to say, these are the ones I want to focus on today. Well, now how can I report on those, right? And that is coming up with clear definitions of what your metrics are. Maybe your lapse definition is different than my lapse definition, but at least your organization knows those things. At least you guys are all focusing on those same goals. And so building those definitions out and documenting them, not gonna lie, documentation, not my best thing. It's just not one of my giftings, but it's something that we have to do to make sure that everybody's really on that same page.
Yeah.
So let's document those things, and then let's kind of create some systems to make those work. Personally, I started working with Excel, right? Great. Love a good Excel report. But if we think about efficiency wise, I have to build that report every single time.
Yeah.
And that is not great, right? I have to build that report every week, every month, however often I'm pulling those reports. So it might also really be helpful for your team to think about using some tools to be able to do that, like a business intelligence tool. Thinking about how do we take one thing that we do all the time, and now I can just update a file, right? It doesn't have to be difficult. It doesn't have to have your entire database there, but just like one file, and that report is already built. Yeah. So thinking about some of those small efficiencies where it might be an investment in technology, but the time that your team is saving from having to rebuild that report every single week and every single opportunity, right? Like you're going to save money over time.
Yeah.
And so kind of thinking about staff hours is just as important. Yeah. And so I think that's one of the things that I would think about there as well.
Yeah, I think that's so important, especially the idea of like thinking about the end in mind. Like, what are you trying to accomplish can so, dictate the way you go about the data that you pull. I think that's really helpful.
Yeah.
It leads kind of into our second question, which says this: we have a ton of data, but we're not sure we're tracking the right things. So how can we use analytics to measure what matters most, specifically for fundraising success?
Yeah. There's a lot of people who do this for a living. And so being able to understand what we're tracking, what are those right things? There's a lot of different pieces, a lot of different metrics that you can go off of. And I think it's core, again, to kind of thinking about who you are as an organization.
Yeah.
Maybe your organization has a really high acquisition model, right? Like you get a lot of new donors every year, and keeping those donors is hard. A great example is like, right, maybe you have a lot of peer-to-peer donors, right? You have a lot of like people who love your mission and they're like asking their friends to give to you.
Yeah.
Well, their friends aren't giving to you, right? They're giving to their friend. And so that is a really different model than somebody who is like really focused on like foundational, like they don't do any peer-to-peer. They're just looking at their communities and they're focused on event heavy opportunities, right? So I think it's important to kind of take a step back first and understand what your model is, right? What is your core? What are you guys currently doing today? And is that what you want to do?
Yeah.
Right? Maybe you want to make a change and you want to add something in, that's totally fine. But again, sitting down as a team and saying, this is what we're doing and this is what we're focusing on. So whether it be having that high acquisition channel, then I would say, man, donor retention is the key metric that you want to focus on. How do I take those peer-to-peer donors and how do I convert them? I want to make a specific model to engage those type of people specifically. So taking that group of people and saying, I'm going to focus specifically and ask really clear messaging to get you to understand what we do, why they should care about us rather than just their friend that they gave to.
Yeah.
And so again, kind of taking it back to understanding those different pieces. Maybe you have a good foundation of people that you're already giving. Maybe we want to think about giving frequency, right? How do we say, like, I have the same donors they give, every year after year. That's great. How can we ask them to give 2 times this year, right?
Yeah.
How can we increase their impact? So it kind of really comes back to that idea of what's your model? How are you doing your fundraising? What does your audience look like? And then focusing on those specific pieces to really hone in on that, like, again, that North Star opportunity for your team.
Yeah, I think that's so helpful. It's not necessarily a one size fits all, but I think the process that you just talked through is sort of one size fits all in figuring out, what is true for you in the organization, and then what does that mean? What steps that you can take? That's super helpful. All right, last one, question number 3. Our donor records are full of duplicates, outdated info, and other missing details. So what's the best way to clean this up? And once we get it cleaned up, how do we keep it accurate moving forward?
Wow. Well, let's just take some realization. Let's set some expectations. I worked at a university for about a decade, and we never finished our data cleanup projects.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay, right? It's hard. It's so hard, especially if you're coming into a system that's been in existence for years and years. It's okay. Everybody's dealing with it. And so I want to kind of set that expectation, right? Like, bad data is out there. It's really, how do we deal with that bad data? And then kind of setting some benchmarks of saying, now this is what we want to do moving forward. And so some of those pieces that I think that were really important for me was looking at and like trying to do some research of what that bad data is. So highlighting and saying, okay, I have wrongly formatted phone numbers. I have, some information was held this way for this many years, but then we changed it for this many years, and kind of listing those things out and getting just a great lay of the land to get started with.
Yeah.
Really just understanding these are the biggest things that we see today, right? These are all the pieces. And then you can start to prioritize. Great. Which ones are affecting us the most in our fundraising today? And being able to say, I'm going to attack this one first. So, perfect example, right? Bad phone numbers. Well, what am I going to do? I'm going to go through. If I don't have a tool that helps me see those bad phone numbers, I've got to figure one out. And so I can use technology like Excel, I can export out all my phone numbers. I can do some matching against those with like some simple Excel equations to say, do they have 10 digits? Are they these types of things? And like kind of doing some of that in bulk so that one, it doesn't take you a ton of time, create some efficiency there, but tackling that one problem at a time. I'm going to go through there, and then I've cleaned up my database, and now I'm going to put some parameters in place to say, now we have this information coming in, and this is what it should look like.
Yeah.
Creating some standard business processes, right? So we've started that. We're creating those business processes. We're saying from now on, yay y'all, this is how we enter in data. This is what it's going to look like. And then being able to have that data that's cleaned up in the back end, and then setting in some regular check-ins, being able to say, hey, are there things that I can do within my system to highlight I have some bad data, or do I need to run a process every now and then to be able to see I've established how I clean it up? Maybe every quarter I pull a list of phone numbers and I say, okay, these are the ones that have been errored. I want to see who's entering in those errors, provide some training for my staff to make sure that they can do that appropriately next time, and then again, fix them up and continue that iterative process over and over and over again.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm sure people are encouraged too to hear it's a work in progress, and even the best of us don't fully arrive always. So that's really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, you only have so much time in the day. I think
Right.
prioritization and efficiency is so important. So thinking through, I know probably y'all have talked about this. You've talked about this with a lot of people. Like AI is hip and cool and fun.
Yeah.
But how do we bring some of that in and help you with that? Like, it's not scary. It might be scary up front, right? There are some things that we want to focus on, like not uploading donor data into AI, right? Like that's not something we want to do. But are there different like pieces of technology that might be able to help us with some of these? A great thing that I had set up with my team is we used Asana, and we used it for project management. And so we did do some of that work, right? We said, okay, this is something we're going to do every month and every quarter, and here are the tasks that need to be completed. Here are the people that we need to have. And so again, like we've set up that business process to say, these are the things we need to focus on. This is weekly, this is monthly, this is quarterly, and kind of just working those things out to say, we know that good fundraising starts with good data. It's the core of everything. And so this is just kind of a continuous process that everyone deals with every day. Everyone deals with it every day. Good data and the need for good data will never go away. And so making sure that your team is really, I think, like dedicating time to that is so, so important.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Kayla, this has been so helpful, both in some of the specifics that you gave people, but I think also the frameworks or the systems or the way of approaching the problem that people can use regardless of the specifics of their organization. So thank you so much for taking the time today to hopefully encourage, educate, and train those listening. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.